Welcome to Visibility by Design podcast with your host, Juliette Stapleton. In this show, I want to help you combine your marketing strategies and your human design potential so you can show up, stand out, and attract your perfect clients with confidence and ease. Are you ready? Enjoy the show. Hi guys, and welcome back to Visibility by Design with me, your host, Juliette Stapleton. And I have a lovely guest for you today. I want to introduce you to Patricia Rundblade. She is an Emotional Manifestor 4/6 profile. She's an energetics intuitive, a podcast host. By the way, I was a guest on the Mindfully Disruptive podcast that I absolutely love. When I asked Patricia how to introduce herself, she gave me this phrase. It said, exhaustion beyond the exhaustion. So if that in any way resonates with you, I know I'm getting goosebumps all over my body. If that resonates with you, tune in. It's going to be a very interesting conversation because Patricia guides women through the deeper layers of exhaustion that often go unseen and unnamed. I'm continuing to get the goosebumps, so that's always a very good sign of an aligned conversation that's about to happen. Patricia, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Juliette. I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Beautiful. The vision I have for this is to talk about your personal experiment with human design a little bit and your story and an experience as a solopreneur, as well as the topic of exhaustion, because I'm very familiar with it. And what fascinates me is that the exhaustion is one of those shadow topics for line 4. When line 4 is misaligned, the exhaustion is how it shows. I know I've witnessed this in someone in my family who has a 4th line body, and that was really palpable. But I do know that on the personality side, it also shows. And so it's not just the topic that you help people, it's something that's so innately yours that's why it's so fascinating to me, this conversation. Can I start with asking you, what is your journey with human design? How did it come into your life? And what was the biggest influence or biggest insights that you think that, okay, this has changed my life?
Good question. My journey with human design was, I think it was maybe typical of other manifestors. You know, it was back in 2016 and I was doing a lot of spiritual work around that time and reading a lot of things. And I actually don't even remember how I came across human design. All I know is that at that point in time, I was like, okay, I just need to download this chart. So I downloaded my chart, went to, I don't even remember which website I went to do it. And I saw it and it was a manifestor and I was like, okay, don't know what that means. But there was so much change going on in my life spiritually that I really couldn't wrap my head around really diving into what it meant as far as that. So I put it aside. And then we jumped to 2021. And I kind of started getting that nudge again about like, you really need to start looking into this, like get back. Human design started showing up in my world again. And I'm like, wait, a chart. And I think I came across Karen Curry Parker's work. And I think that's what really sparked my reignition into wanting to know more about it. So I started doing a deep dive into it and started learning a little bit more about it. Being a manifestor was still confusing to me. I was still like, I really don't know what that means in the scheme of all the energy types. Like, what's everybody talking about? Like, why, I really didn't get it. I'm like, I don't get it. I probably still don't get it a lot. So I started doing that deep dive. And then I had a big transition in my life in 2022. I decided to pick up in true manifestor style, what I'm finding out, decided to pick up my life, move to a whole different place, take on a job. I'm a teacher by credential, by job, I guess, if you want to say it. Took a job working on a Native American reservation down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So I took all of my human design stuff because I thought, well, I'm going to be down there for a few years. I might as well just really use that time to dive into my human design. Well, my human design experiment was less about books and more about living exactly what being out of alignment truly means. And the story gets, it goes way deeper into, into a lot of things, but being down in that teaching environment, being down, it was a very small school. There was a lot of parts of my human design that came into play. A lot of my, like my incarnation cross and my gate 31 and my 2145 channel, which are all based in leadership and assumed leadership, which I did a lot of down there. But it also showed me a lot of places where I was really giving my power away, really working in the shadows of a lot of my centers, especially my will center and my emotional solar plexus, which is my authority. So it was really a very trying time, which took me to a long period of exhaustion. I knew I'd always been exhausted. And I think recently I really kind of started saying, wow, I've always felt exhausted. And I always thought that that was normal.
Wow, it's so interesting. You mentioned, I just want to ask you, you mentioned the shadow of your will center. You have a defined will center. So with the will center that's defined, common folk, we just assume that you guys can go and achieve anything you want to achieve, and you are designed for commitments, you're designed for goals. But what nobody tells you is that this is something that only operates when it's 100%, but then when it discharges, it goes into this complete exhaustion, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. I realized being down there and in that moment that I wasn't allowing my will center any time to rest. Everything was so boom, boom, boom that I just kept working through borrowed energy of my will center. And it got to a point about 14 months into it where I was driving back to the Grand Canyon. My body just decided, no, we're not doing that. It threw me into this panic attack on the side of the highway. I was crying uncontrollably. I literally had to pull off to the side of the highway because I couldn't drive anymore. I was shaking. I couldn't catch my breath. There was just tears. And I had to call a friend of mine to literally talk me off the ledge of what was going on in my whole body at that moment. It literally took me about 4 hours to actually regain my whole being composure again, to be able to drive again, because my body was literally telling me, enough. We've done enough. You need to stop. We are taking over. And that was my biggest moment of like, wow, I've been living in a big ball of exhaustion without realizing it, and now my body has just said enough. We're not doing this anymore. So yeah.
And how this is interesting, because this is what you guide other women through now. How did the idea of creating a business come? Was that the sort of turning point?
It was a turning point in pivoting my business. I'd always had a coaching business, and I'd always done a lot of through a lot of spiritual journey work with a lot of my clients. So it was a big moment to pivot my business into focusing more on really what exhaustion truly looks like. Because after that moment on the highway, for the next 4 months, I literally lived on my sofa. And I was in such deep physical, mental, emotional, spiritual exhaustion that I really couldn't do a whole lot. I literally burned my whole body out. And I needed a deep restorative time. And that's what happened over the next 4 months. Is I really just gave my body time to just decompress and relax. Now, I know a lot of people don't get the luxury of doing that in their lives. But through that, I've had to learn, like, okay, how can I do this Like I only have a weekend, like, or I only have a week off, or I only have summers off. How do I build all these restorative practices through a daily life that's filled with other things, commitments, families, relationships, careers, or businesses and things like that. So I've had to learn how to kind of really build in that practice of restorative rest. And as a manifestor, right, our rest is supposed to bring us to peace, but it's supposed to bring us to peace through things that fill our cup, not necessarily through an exhaustion that has you sleeping on your sofa for, 24 hours a day.
I think it's one of those things where people take things literally when they say rest, and they think that rest has to be, lying still. Whereas, as you said, for a manifestor and the peace, it's just leave me alone doing my thing and,
Yes.
and focusing on what I want to focus. It's not about actual resting body-wise. However, you would probably be forced to. And you're not the first manifestor with the defined will and actually fourth line. I know at least two more. And I just wanted to add something, and this is from my own human design experiment. There's one way how life works, because you said, can't afford doing this, or this is not like in real life that you can do that. But I find that the more I experiment with my design, let's say as a projector, as a splenic projector, and the more life started adjusting. And now something that before I would not believe that's possible to have this lifestyle, now not suddenly over years, but now it feels to me that suddenly the life is evolving around me and my experiment and my need. So my brain, of course, feels like ashamed of you resting too much. But it's so interesting how when you understand things about yourself, when you understand that you need restorative practices, for example, in your day, life starts also changing.
It does. And I think a lot of times part of the conditioning around exhaustion is that we can't do that we can't give ourselves permission to actually do things that restore ourselves. And I think a lot of our belief about exhaustion sometimes is about the kind of box that we kind of keep ourselves in. So because true, the world tells you exhaustion looks like this, therefore you need to react like this, instead of saying, no, exhaustion feels this way, and I need to have the ability to feel that I can take care of it in this other way that is more replenishing for ourselves. And I think we get a little confused about that sometimes within our own energetics of what that looks like.
I totally agree. And, I'm a kind of person who doesn't really understand emotions. I have a completely open emotional center. And I don't understand emotions because I need to understand them before feeling them, because somebody says to me, how do you feel? I know I had some therapy, and the therapist was saying, how do you feel today? And I had a list of emotions, and I sometimes would just take some words that approximately name something without actually, embodying or feeling this, because I need to logically understand. And I know I've listened to a couple of episodes. There was particularly one episode where you described emotional constipation. It was about taking in emotions and how your body, allowing them to get stuck in that. And I have to say, for me, that description, and guys, please, this is one of the latest episodes. I don't remember exactly, was it called emotional constipation? I think it might have been. It
literally was called, yes, emotional constipation.
Yes, on the Mindfully Disruptive podcast, guys. It was very interesting, just Patricia's talking about her own experience. But for me, and someone like me who needs to logically understand what this emotion is, and then through logic, you identify it, and then you can feel it in a way, so it kind of goes through making sense, and then you can allow and feel it. And what you just mentioned, that we sometimes don't know, we have this prescriptive idea of what, for example, exhaustion needs to feel like, and that's how you react to it. And I find that one of the things that I really appreciate is how you describe these other things that we just bottle. We just try and push through.
We do. And the thing is, when a lot of my work revolves around the will center and the shadow of exhaustion around it, because there's so many components that are involved in exhaustion. It isn't just about, all of the overproductivity or overworking or things like that. But it's so much more. It's all about those little minor things that we do to either give our power away, or those things that we do to overexert our power, our human will to do things. Like if we're over aggressive with our goals, right? That really can drain your system energetically, right? But maybe we're too timid, or we're too unsure about what we want to do in life, about following what we want to do. That also gives away your power. It kind of takes, because you're allowing others to kind of manipulate you or guide you, or into what their beliefs are, instead of you standing on for your own willpower, your own will to be who you are. And I think a lot of that really emotionally comes to play in our body and stays in our body. And if we don't really work through a lot of those things, and the will center is associated with our stomach. And so a lot of that thing is, how do we digest all of those emotions that we allow to get trapped in? And those things cause exhaustion too, because then our energy isn't flowing the way it needs to be.
I love that. And, I want to bring this, with your permission, I want to bring this into a story that you once shared with me, where you said to me that you were very visible and active online, and you were so inspired, and you were just very consistent. And then something happened. And after that, you went into this, what we're really talking about, the exhaustion, the will to show up, was really affected. And the whole story really does evolve around giving your power away. But maybe I will let you, in your own words, share with us a little bit.
Yes. Oh, I know the story exactly that you're talking about. So as manifestors, we initiate through these creative urges. So in 2025, what year are we in? 2025, early 2025, I started getting this creative urge to bring a group of manifestors together. And it started out as kind of this dream, and it was like, yes, there's this group of manifestors, and we're all speaking, and we're all just doing what manifestors do. And I kept putting it off, like, that's just crazy, until the dreams started bringing me names of specific manifestors that I needed to work with. And they were all manifestors that I had already spoken to on my podcast. So I already knew that they were very powerful. And so I thought, okay, if you're starting to bring me names, then I guess I really need to kind of follow through with this. So it was really quick back. It was probably about a year ago in May, where I kind of started contacting these manifestors, and I'm like, here's my creative urge. Your name was brought up in the dream. This is what I want to do. I want to create a summit where we have 10 manifestor voices, and we're all speaking about these unspoken truths. And it was really intended to be this moment of initiation from every manifestor, where they could really speak about something in their world that really hasn't been spoken about a lot, right? That people are really shying away from. So as it is with manifestor energy, things started going really fast, and I was working in the background, getting things organized and doing what my will center does, right? Just really kind of planning it all out, making sure that they had the freedom, the autonomy to do whatever they wanted to do. And we had a short turnaround time for this event, only with actually 2 or 3 months. Actually, it was like 3 months. And we were all working collaboratively. I was using my leadership skills to kind of bring everyone together and work collaboratively, and everybody played a part, and everybody had their own initiations within the whole thing, as far as marketing, as far as other parts of the event. And so as we got within about a week of this event, we were having one of our final meetings. And one of the people hadn't been participating because there was some personal issues going on. And within that, I think what happened is that kind of slow rolled into allowing other people to kind of start voicing their concerns that they've had over these last 3 months of work that we've been doing. And it literally lit the match, Juliette, as far as everything that has been going, because during that whole time we'd been doing a lot of pre-promoting. I'd been doing a lot of videos and Instagram lives, been doing a lot of marketing with our faces everywhere, and we were getting some really good response. But in this one moment when we were all together, all it took was one person just being uncertain about what needed to happen, and it lit the match. And when you have a bunch of manifestors in the same room, it just started to light all the other matches, and everything just, you could just see it. Everything was just slowly burning down, because all of a sudden everybody's fears and concerns were starting to rise up about what was happening. And, one person was like, well, now all of a sudden it's not a good day for me to do this summit. And then another person was like, well, I can't talk to an empty Zoom room. And so all of these, I guess, insecurities, about using our voice and using our presence started to come up. And it really, in that moment, and being an emotional authority, really, it took a big hit on my solar plexus. It took a big hit on, I guess, understanding who I am as a manifestor. And within that, after that moment, after that hour and a half of watching everything that we've created burn down, it took me a few days to respond back to them as I followed my emotional authority to let my waves settle, and then, come back with my response to all of their concerns. Ultimately, we ended up canceling the event because I thought I could not, in all good integrity, move forward with the event the way it was left at that moment. But in the ensuing months after that, I realized that it had an impact on my visibility. And I actually ended up taking, in the next couple of months, I noticed that I was taking a lot more breaks from actually even speaking on my own podcast, but also taking a break from actually showing up on social media and showing up in my own marketing. Let me take a moment of breath here.
I can see that this is a very emotional moment for you, but I also feel this is the second time I am hearing this story, and both times there is something, that an observation that comes to me, that this is just such a fascinating experience to have in terms of just pure mechanics. When you put, I wanted to call this episode "What happens when you put 10 manifestors in one room?" but really, I do love that we talked about exhaustion. It's much more like that. But if you think about the energy of impact and initiation, and to put 10 people or just a bunch of people who energetically, mechanically are like this, and whatever they're initiating is like a match is burnt, and then all the matches start burning and it turns into a fire. If you're ever thinking it feels like a good idea as a concept, I think that it was an amazing idea, but in terms of mechanics, it just showed why. This is what Rauru said, you have no choice, because if you have the energetic makeup like this is what might happen, it's not that it's bound to happen. It is what it is. Things happen and we sometimes cancel things, but I do agree. And I know the pain that the aftermath of these situations can take you down completely. And the fact that you haven't completely stopped is still really, really good, because I know that much less serious situation, but a comment on my podcast years ago was the end of that podcast, and I interviewed hundreds of people on that podcast. It was the end of that podcast, was 6 months, no launching, almost no visibility. And that's the effect that I consider myself a confident person who knows what they're doing. And yet, no, there's sometimes we just soak this in instead of filtering it and saying, this is not mine. This is just, somebody's opinion or energetic influence. It's not mine.
Right.
And I want to acknowledge this because I know people are listening, and a lot of people go through this situation. Somebody said something, somebody resisted. For a 4-6, one thing is the manifestor and the emotional wave, the emotional authority that was affected by this. But the 4-6, you're the queen bee of this network, and suddenly this network turning back at you. It's a really negative experience. How are you feeling now?
It was such a learning experience. One, because it did show me a different aspect of how I'm using my will center energy, right? And how I'm using my defined will center. It also showed me maybe a little bit of maybe where I'm lying to myself about things. And I think a lot of us in the world do that. Sometimes we're not really truthful with ourselves about how this makes us feel, or how we perceive it and how our body takes it in. And so I really feel that sometimes, whether you have an emotional authority or not, right? How do you deal with the energetic input that you get from events that maybe impact you in a negative way, right? Take the emotions out of it. You still have the energetic vibration from all of this, and it still impacts your system in some way, whether it's mentally or whether it's through your heart or how how you feel, how your body responds to it. So I think it's something that we kind of don't always want to admit to ourselves, that it really impacted me in a way that affected a lot of other things in my life, had like a domino effect of a lot of things. And I think being able to circle back and look at those kind of things and really kind of bring light to them so that you can bring some healing to them really helps you release the burden of carrying them.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. That kind of truth, that moment of truth with yourself, because we all have these situations, and I know how many people just completely stop, and this could be a make or break situation, something like that,
Right.
But they're not going to stop. They're going to happen again and again and again, because we're in a game of communicating, networking, and collaborating with people, where
Right.
we can't be in a vacuum, especially in this kind of solopreneurship or expert business, coaching business. It's always going to be, we need content, we need to show up, and people are always going to be there. And that conditioning, I think this is what you're talking about, this energetic frequency that conditions you through whatever way. And this is what we're taking away then. We can stop being emotional about it, but it's just there. It's sitting somewhere very deep. So maybe then my question to you would be of a practical nature, a little bit of a practical nature, because we started a conversation about the exhaustion and your guidance. Maybe you could give our listeners a couple of practices that something like this can, well, first of all, truthful moments with yourself. But what else could be done in order to start? I'm not saying get back on that horse, but at least look at that horse again.
Yeah, at least get back on that horse again. I do a lot of my own dialoguing, excuse me. I do a lot of my own dialoguing through journaling. And I don't necessarily just kind of sit and write out sentences after sentences. I do a lot of mind mapping. And that's, kind of where we create a bubble, and then you kind of draw little circles and around what that thought that brings up. And so a lot of that really helps me kind of in the moment when I really want to be truthful about something. I really kind of have to brainstorm it out. And I do have quite a few different practices around that, where you take that brain dump of everything you're feeling in that moment, and then you take it to the next level, where you're really kind of looking at it from maybe an outsider's perspective, and like, okay, well, let's look at what really happened, and really kind of own up to what really happened. What was your part? What was everybody else's part? Really kind of now be truthful about what's actually happening. You took all of the other junk away. Now let's just be truthful about it. And then take that and go, what would you really like to have happen? What would you really like to have come out of that? How would you like to feel about it? How would you like to think about that? How would you like to be perceived in that if that situation arose again? How could that happen? So it takes you through this little bit of truth, right? You know, these steps of truth that take you through it. And it kind of creates your own medicine around what you want to create, what you want to turn that experience into, because it doesn't need to sit in your body in a negative way. It needs to be processed and healed and released out so that you can move forward.
I love that, because it's kind of a form of grief, isn't it? It's a form of grief. And I know myself, it took me years to even start processing the grief of loss of my second husband, for example. You know, it's just sitting there and you can't even identify it. You just bottled it so deeply that sometimes it comes a little bit to the surface, but it's still not enough to fully sit with it and understand it. And the process, I love the idea of the mind mapping, by the way. You know, I also do journaling, and I kind of like writing, but sometimes, you know, I do lists. It's a very projector thing to do lists, but I love the idea of mind mapping, just what is the thought, and then mapping what is this bringing more of that, because we're taking all that out of our head and emotions, and now it's looking at us from a paper. We can actually, you know, take it outside, out from, we're taking it from within onto the outside, and then it's so much easier to process and let go when something is looking at you and not inside your own head. And I don't think we do that enough in most areas of our lives. I don't think that we take a step back and write things down, especially when we're stuck or exhausted. And I love the question, what would you have wanted to see to happen? I think it's not about clinging on or feeling, you know, any sort of shame or guilt or any kind of negative feeling, regret maybe, but also to acknowledge that, okay, this is the feeling I really wanted. It didn't happen now. Now I can let go of that situation. It happened. It's data. It's we're not negating that it hurt, but it's data now. And so going forward, do you want to do something like this again? Yes, no, because sometimes the situation could be repeated in a different format, and it's going to be wonderful, you know, because you now know exactly what you're going for.
Yeah. And that's true, because in thinking of that situation with the manifestors, one of the manifestors from that group is someone that I'm still in contact with quite frequently. And she actually asked me a couple of months ago, she's like, so when are we doing that again? And so I was like, well, I'm not sure just yet. The urge hasn't come back again, but it's going to look completely different, obviously, when I do this next time. And, you know, it may not be with all manifestors. It may be just a couple of manifestors and some other energy types. You know, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do know that the seed of that urge is still within me. So I do know that it's still going to come out. And I believe that this is just one iteration of like, yeah, tried that, didn't work. Let's move on to the next one and kind of see. And it'll eventually come to fruition of what it needs to be. It is just my responsibility to just be patient and loving with it and allow it to come through, because that is the creative process. The creative process isn't the end product of what's created. The creative process is actually being able to sit with that seed, with that initiation, and allowing it to have time to grow, to be birthed, to, you know, become what it needs to become in whatever timing that means. And I think for a lot of us, exhaustion is because we've lost our ability to tap into our own creativity, our own ability to allow things to process and to grow and to mold and shape. It's not specifically about drawing anything on paper or putting anything on canvas. It's simply about allowing the ideas that we have about our life and about who we are and allowing them to come to fruition. I think when we stuff all that in and when we box it all in, that creates a lot of exhaustion, because we're sitting under the heaviness of all of these unfulfilled things.
I love that. And it brings another phrase to my mind that I had it outlined in a big black marker. Confusion takes time. what you're saying is allowing time and trusting the time, because when you don't trust time, and I know that from my gene keys where impatience and hunger, my body lines, shadows, it's all about just letting time put things in its place. You don't need to do nothing, just do something else, but let this part of your life just unfold. And it always does. It always does. The moment I let go of that, trying to control, trying to push, the exhaustion comes when you push. The exhaustion comes because you're always going to get a pushback. And that doesn't even depend on specifically your human design, although sometimes with your human design, it will be even more so showing up as an exhaustion. But I feel like for absolutely everyone, there is a form of exhaustion that pushing and not trusting the time happens. So I really love what you're saying here.
The work that I do really is around helping women kind of understand that, because I think women in general, we're so conditioned in so many ways to be this, to be that, to be this other thing, that it really takes us out of our own creativity, our own flow of our own flow of our natural cycles. And I'm not talking about physiological cycles. I'm talking about our energetic cycles of who we are. And that creates a lot of exhaustion. All the many roles that we have to play, all the many hats that we have to wear really wears on us. And as women, we are intended to be the most amazing creative beings because we create life. So creativity should be at the center of our world all the time. So yeah, I
love that. And I know that you brought well, you didn't bring it physically, but you have a gift for our listeners that can help them a little bit, at least start the journey of, I don't even know what is the word when you're removing the exhaustion.
I call it unburdening because it's really about unburdening yourself from the ideas and from the energetics and maybe sometimes from the physicality of exhaustion. And that's also the title of my book that's coming out soon, because I was recently inspired with another creative urge to write a book about what does it actually look like to not be carrying all this exhaustion. So it's an unburdening of oneself.
I love it, guys. If you're listening to this, check Amazon. It might be there already. It's unmissable title. So definitely. And then whenever it's out, I will try and put the link into the show notes as well, just in case. And then your gift?
My gift is, it's actually just an introduction to understanding where exhaustion lives in your body. A lot of times we feel so much, we have pains, we have things, but we never understand what it goes into. So it's called the body map, and it's a very simple art-based practice. Actually, I do a lot of art-based work and somatic art work. So it's just an art-based practice where you can really look at those spaces in your body where you may feel that pain or you may feel this tension. And it allows you to kind of really give color to it, give shape to it through some art practices and through some breathing practices as well. And it's just something that you can do whenever you want. It's not a one and done kind of thing. You can just kind of keep doing it over and over again to kind of really create that awareness of where you're holding exhaustion in your body.
I love that. I love that. Okay, guys, there's a link to this gift in the show notes or the button underneath this video, wherever you're watching. It's going to be there. Patricia, thank you so much for being my lovely guest today. I really so thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, the examples that you gave me, all the goosebumps that I've had here throughout the conversation just shows this full alignment. And I just think that you're such a lovely woman. And this is the second collaboration that we have, hopefully not the last one. Guys, please follow Patricia. Look up her podcast, Mindfully Disruptive Podcast. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of collaborations as well. There's a lot of other people that come in. Some or most of them are manifestors, sometimes not. I think if you're going to do them at the next summit, you will not put those manifestors in one room and deal with them individually. That would be my mentorship advice. I think it's such a beautiful concept, and I hope that it will cook. It will, simmer at the back burner for a while, but then it'll come into the world and it'll be something amazing. Patricia, thank you so much. And guys, we will see you in the next episode of Visibility by Design.